Chris.
How's it going? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, all good.
Excellent. Just 1 second. There we go. Oh. How's your day going?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you. Not too bad at all. That's a very good quality image you have there. You're using a fancy camera.
Always. I've been working on getting it to. Normally, I just sort of just turn it on and point it, but I've actually put some lights out and a little bit of magic to
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying
Studio
to
quality production.
Well, I'm trying to do a channel called Blender Clinic on YouTube, so it's kind of just launched about half an hour ago.
Oh, right, brand new.
Yeah. So, I've been working on it for a little while, but we sort of launched it. Actually, it might be of use to your students. So, I mean, if after this anyone wants to have a one-on-one Zoom call, which then goes up on YouTube, where I help them go through their Blender queries and quibbles, then they can hit me up on Twitter at Blender Clinic, and I can sort of do a one-to-one session, or they can just message me a question without appearing, and I can try and answer it for them.
That sounds great.
So yeah, it's come off the back of doing these with yourself and a couple of my other clients who they're like, I'm really stuck with something, or one of our animators is stuck, and I wind up in a Zoom call. I'm thinking, I keep getting asked the same questions again and again. Maybe we should do this as a channel. So yeah, I've been just massaging it and trying to get it to work. So yeah, that's the idea. Anyway,
awesome, great
shameless
idea.
Self-promotion.
I'm just going to go onto Twitter right now and find you.
So I've got two accounts. There's at HoloPixels and at Blender Clinic. And the Blender Clinic one, if you direct message me, it should be direct messages should be open on there, and you should be able to just fire off a little question at me, and I'll hopefully it won't be just full of spam by the end of the week. Yeah. But then again, we know how this works.
Awesome. Blender Clinic. Sorry, what was the other one?
HoloPixels. Which has been, so I'm rebranding the company. I don't want to be United Filmdom anymore. It was cute about 10 years ago when I started the business, but now it just sounds like nationalistic. Horrible. And I'm as left as they come. So I figure, do you know what? I'm just going to dump that shit. I'll still be, don't worry, I'll still be billing as United Filmdom, but yeah.
Marvelous.
Okay.
Good stuff. So it looks like we've got a whole bunch of people here. That's awesome. Some of these might be classrooms full as well. So That's cool.
Well, I've already done a run through of this a couple of times, because as we discussed doing tracking, motion tracking and so on, and we discussed doing like 3 or 4 different things. Well, there is no way to do that in an hour. So I chose a path which covered a lot of topics which could be extrapolated out from that. I've actually done a video for it, which will go live tomorrow on my channel, which is a cleaner version of this, because this might get a bit rambly. There's questions, all of that sort of stuff. So if anyone wants to reference that, there'll be a link on my YouTube channel or on the website, blenderclinic.com tomorrow. So it should just cover all of this succinctly. So if I lose it halfway through and just totally forget how to track, then you can always go to that, and that's there for you.
That's great. I'll make sure to, because I'm going to record this, if that's okay. So I can
please do, yeah,
for our students, but I'll link that in as well.
Well, I'll probably post the live recording as well, just as an alternate video, and yeah. But anyway, yeah.
Perfect.
So unless there's anything else, if everyone's here, shall I just dive straight in?
Yeah, sure. So are you going to record it, or shall I hit record, or what's going to work?
Why don't we just do both? I'm recording this end. Zoom should be recording automatically as a premium feature. And then if you can record it as well, then, if anything goes wrong with any of the feeds, then someone's got it.
Okay. I can't record it. It just says, please ask the host to give you permission to record.
Right. Well, how would I do that?
No idea.
It's recording my end anyway.
That'll be fine.
And it'll be up on the cloud. So I'll send you a link directly, but I'll also pop it up on the channel.
Perfect.
All right. So
should we?
Sorry.
Yeah. I don't think I need to introduce you, because you're just about to do that.
Please
I can do if you want.
Yeah, well, it's much nicer for me. I mean,
well, greetings everyone. Welcome to another Nextgen Live. We have the absurdly talented Chris McFall, formerly of United Filmdom, now of Blender Clinic.
Holopixel. Holopixel Studios. Yeah, that's the overarching company.
Okay, excellent.
Sorry.
Thank you.
God.
So let's dive right into some 3D tracking. Malarkey, take it away, please.
All right. So I should preface this by saying that I'm cursed when it comes to 3D tracking. So yeah, it basically never goes right when I do 3D tracking, and up until recently, because I learned a few things, and I've anyway. Waffle. 3D tracking is one of those things, you get it in a lot of different apps, from After Effects, Buju, Synthesize, and Blender's had it for years, but recently it got real good. So that's what we're going to take a look at. Because Blender actually got so good at it, and because I am, as I've said, I'm cursed when it comes to tracking. I've tried it in all sorts of software. I've been doing it for 10 years, tracking various shots, not like as my primary job, but for various projects. And I've always struggled with it. But because I'm super familiar with Blender, and because it just got so good, it got so much faster, I seem to have shaken off the curse. I say that, I'm about to try and do this all live, so this might be actually, the curse was lulling me into a false sense of security. I think a lot of people struggle with tracking, and I'm going to try and dismiss some of the misconceptions and so on of that as we go through this project. So what I'm going to do, straight into Blender, new VFX.
Hey Chris, sorry, can I just jump in for 1 second?
There's
There's a comment in the chat that says the video is flipped. I didn't actually clock this, but if I put my head close to the screen, it looks like it might be actually flipped left to right.
Bear with me. I know what that'll be. That'll be the virtual camera. Start virtual camera. That must be something in here. Right. Virtual camera. Bear with me 1 second. Horizontal flip. Is that any better for you?
That's the one. Yeah.
Oh, right. Because
perfect.
now I'm seeing that and it's flipped for me. So my face should be on the left-hand side of your screen.
Yes, that's what we've got.
Okay, good. So that's something to know. In Zoom, it flips my thing around in a weird way. Good to know. Thank you for pointing that out. That would have been embarrassing. Everyone's like, it's back to front. He lives in a topsy-turvy world of tracking in Blender. So shall I continue? Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah. And thank you to Nescott, whoever it was at Nescott that pointed that out. You've saved the video. Brilliant.
Excelente. So, okay. So yeah, to get started, go to New, VFX, and it will open up this layout. Now, the important thing to remember with Blender is it's not like Resolve and stuff like that, when you've got different panels which you can switch to and they're like different programs within the program. It's just a different orientation of the windows. So it's basically swapped out the 3D viewport for the tracking movie clip editor. Okay, so that's all it is. It also configures a couple of nodes and a couple of collections and bits and bobs, but we'll get to that. So what we're going to do is open up some footage, and it's opened up on the wrong screen. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go to my footage. Now, this footage that we're using for this demo is downloaded from a Blender Cloud. So it's CC BY licensed, which is Creative Commons BY, which means you can use it freely, distribute it freely, provided you credit the Blender Cloud. Sorry, I should just demonstrate what I did there. This is an image sequence rather than a movie clip. So I went into the folder, select the first one, hit A to select all, and then open the clip, okay? And that opens up our footage. Except I did it wrong because I'm an idiot. Very frustrating that it keeps opening the browser on the wrong window, but yeah. So if you do get that issue, then you go into list view and select the first one of the sequence, A to select all, and open clip, and it should, there we go, that's what we wanted. So you can see this footage. The reason we're going to use this footage rather than anything bespoke I've shot is, firstly, Didn't have the time. I've got kids. Secondly, it's shot on a really well lit green screen, which is, you know, anyone who's tried that, I think a lot of you guys have recently done a green screen module. You'll know how hard it is and time consuming it is to light a green screen right. It's chock full of tracking markers. It's shot on an old, because this footage is from quite a few years ago, but a very good camera, very well lit. So it's quite low on noise, it's quite low on compression, and it's already broken down into an image sequence. Now, Blender uses it tracks image sequences far better than it does movie clips, and this is down to how certain movie clip compression works. It uses group of picture compression and various other tricks to make the file sizes smaller, but that can be quite bad in consistency of imagery for the tracker to work with. So if you've got the time, I do recommend splitting the clip into an image sequence, which you can do in Blender, but we're not going to do today because, you know, lots and lots of circuitous routes around beating around the bush. So anyway, we've got our footage into our window. We're going to then hit set scene frames, and what that does, it sets up the start and end points of your project to the length of the footage. And then prefetch, that'll load the footage into the computer's memory and allow us to scrub through it a lot quicker and work with it a lot quicker. So you should do that every time you open signing into the tracker. Just click those two buttons and you're pretty much set up to go. Now, because we're on limited time, I'm actually going to set the end point of my scene to 240 frames. So we're not going to do the whole 600 and something, because I think that's, you know, that's enough right there. And what we can see is a man having romantic liaisons with a box. I just realized how bad that sounds. But yeah, this footage is taken from a film called Tears of Steel. It was a short film the Blender Foundation made a couple of years ago to help them develop visual effects, stuff like this tracker. And this is supposed to be the head of this gigantic hulking robot, and the guy's sort of saying goodbye to it as it dies, I think is what happens in the scene. Anyway, with that, with that said, let's continue on. So there's something really important to know about tracking, but I didn't realize until, you know, very late into my tracking career. When we add a tracking point, don't worry, I'll go into how we do that later. You're using a motion model here, and this one says location, this one says location and rotation, this one says location, rotation and scale, and this one says perspective. Now, when you're actually tracking and you track that through, that tracker doesn't record location, rotation and scale. All it records, no matter what you set it on, is location. That is it. It is a point in space. All of this stuff here, location, rotation and scale, perspective, all that, these are motion models. This is basically, it's pattern recognition. That's all that a tracker does. So you can see the tracker here. This is what the tracker is seeing. It's going this. So when you set up a tracker, you create a keyframe for that tracker. This keyframe, this is the pattern that I am looking for in all the other frames. Now, as you can see, as I've scrubbed through, that ball has moved. So the location has changed. Now with a location model, it will realign the tracker to find this pattern and set points for, you know, and that's how it tracks it. Now, if the camera spun, you know, if it twisted, then that pattern would be rotating. So you've got location and rotation. It uses rotation to try and find that image. It's still only recording location data, but it's using location and rotation to match up the pattern. Likewise, if the camera dollies in and out, which this one does, that pattern's getting smaller, so it's using scale. And then if you're tracking something like a flat plane on a wall, affine and perspective, they allow skewing to try and better match this pattern and find the image within subsequent frames. Still only recording location data, okay? Now, the reason this is important is I used to slap a lock, rot and scale tracker onto something and be like, well, why hasn't it tracked the rotation and the scale? Why hasn't it done this? What's going on? And not being aware of what the tracker is doing meant that I was afraid to make tweaks which would have saved certain projects or made them certainly a lot easier to do. So that's really important to know. But don't worry, we'll sort of keep touching on that as we go through this. Now, over here, these settings, these are the settings for a new tracker. So as you create trackers, whatever you set here, every new tracker you create will have these attributes, these settings. Over here, on this side, this is where once a tracker is created, if you change something over here, it doesn't change anything. So if I change this to perspective, this is not a perspective tracker. It's still an affine tracker. Yeah, this is just, but that's a perspective tracker because I created it afterwards. So this is, I'm over egging this, aren't I? This is the settings for new trackers as you create them. But once you've created a tracker, you need to change its you can change its settings over here. So now we've got that. Look, it still says affine. We can now change that to perspective. Yeah. So that is something within the UI, within the interface of Blender, that trips everyone up. And I was doing a record of this yesterday just to sort of test what I was going to talk about. And halfway through, I still did it. I tried to change the settings over here and was wondering why it still wouldn't work. And I might do it again today. And then I'll claim it's a deliberate mistake. But it's not, because that's really confusing. Just be aware. For setting up trackers, for editing trackers, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to use a fine motion model because it is not only very powerful, but it's very fast. Not that speed really matters. Blender is so fast in the recent updates of Blender. It's become so fast as a tracker that you could use any of them really. We're going to use keyframe matching. And what keyframe matching is as I said, when you create a track point, let's create one here. So to create a track point, it's Control and click, and then I'm just going to hit S and scale it up slightly, and that's the pattern we're tracking. Again, actually, you can hit R to rotate, S to scale, G to move, but also for fine sort of detail, sort of that finessing the position of a tracking point, you can move it around up here as well. So when I've created that tracker, it's created a keyframe for the tracker on the frame on which it was created. Now, it won't, if I scan through with that, see how fast that is? That is blazingly fast. If I scan through and about here, I hit G and move the tracker again, that creates another keyframe. Now, I don't think there's actually any way to observe the keyframes within Blender, unless I'm missing something really obvious, but I've never needed to see the keyframes for that. There's keyframes for masks, we'll get to that later, but yeah. But just know, anytime you sort of move it, you're, you edit this, you're creating a new keyframe and it will track from that point, from that keyframe. I'm going to undo all that. The other option on here is previous frame. So instead of tracking from frame 1, from that keyframe you set, it will track, this is frame 1, and then it tracks to frame 2. I can't do this and get the mic, this is fun. So yeah, you track from frame 1 to frame 2. Then it's tracking from frame 2 to frame 3, but it's not tracking using the pattern from frame 1 anymore. It's tracking the pattern from frame 2. So whatever was under the tracker and on frame 2 after it tracked from frame 1, then that is the new pattern that it's tracking. Now, that's really powerful because lots of different things can change in the pattern of an image. In fact, if I track forward again on that, just look at how much, if we look over here under our track, just look how much the image boils and changes, yeah? And yeah, imagine if like lighting conditions are changing, if things are skewing, all sorts of stuff's happening, and maybe a shadow passes over it. All of that stuff can really throw a track, but this previous frame matching can help solve that. However, it does create sloppier tracks. They're not as accurate, but knowing when to use it is an important part of this. So I hope you're all still following me. How are you guys doing? Sam, you following? Is this all making sense?
Yeah. I'm learning. I'm laughing along.
I'm learning.
Okay. I enjoy the man having romantic liaisons with the box.
Yeah. What's in it? Gwyneth Paltrow's head. Great. So we've got pre-pass. Always leave that on. It's basically I'm not going to go into what pre-pass is, but just leave it ticked. Trust me. And then you got normalize, and normalize we'll touch on later. But essentially, it's about changing light conditions. So if a point is getting brighter and darker, normalize will help to even that out and allow the track to continue. It's if you're shooting outdoors, you're not in studio conditions. Normalize on, please. Normalize on. And then we've got red, green, and blue, whether it's tracking all the RGB channels or one or a mixture of the two. But again, we'll get to that. I would never touch these actually. If you want to change the tracking thing, I always do it over here. Shall we track it? Let's get stuck in. So I'm going to control click to create a point. I'm going to scale it up a little bit. I'm going to create another point down here, scale it up a little bit. Yeah, scaling up, but basically a finer point like this, you know, is great, but sometimes it's, you know, I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to say here. Okay, I tell you what, here's a better place to demonstrate it. Here is a tennis ball on a stick. This is high-tech stuff. Now, if I were to track this tennis ball on a stick, I can guarantee you, because I've done this track before, that it will break because at some point this red X, this tracking marker on the wall, crosses behind it. And instead of seeing, you know, this yellow on green with a little bit of black over here, something else has interfered with the pattern and broken it, and it's significant enough that it loses the track entirely at this point. So sometimes you'll want to scale. Now, you know, a big pattern, you know, there's more in it to track, but also that boil we saw earlier, that roiling sort of almost heat haze effect that you get in camera footage as, you know, the image seems to be, you know, it becomes alive. God, I don't know what I'm trying to say. If you've got a larger image, then it's less, it's going to be less distorted by that, and therefore it should track a little bit better. But you get this sort of thing where you get interference. The bigger the space, the more stuff can interfere. So we're going to actually track over here. I'll scale it down where that red menace can't interfere. What was the red menace anyway? Is that a comic book thing? Is that something to do with Red Skull? I don't know. Answers on a postcard. So anyway, I'm going to keep adding tracking points. Now, I'm trying to track the camera here. I'm not trying to track an object. We'll get to that later. So, actually, what I should do is not have, apologies, I've gotten myself a little tied up. I'm not supposed to be adding tracking points on the object yet. Basically, anything that moves, if you're trying to track a camera, anything that moves separately to the camera is going to muck up your track. You want to track static objects to allow, you know, so that we can get a sort of motion model of the camera. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to, oh, I'm doing such a good job, aren't I? Everything's a cock up. Yeah. So I'm finding little points of contrast, things that the tracker is going to recognize. Now, these are interesting points, these three here, because they're on the floor. And that will allow us to align a floor plane, because we'll know where the floor is, because we'll find these patterns and go, ah, that's the floor. And later on, I'll come back to it, but I'm going to track these points here, and then we'll know where the light is in the scene. One of the things that is so powerful about Blender as opposed to something like After Effects or, you know, you've got Mocha as well, is this is tracking stuff on a 2D plane, and then it's going to extrapolate it out into the 3D world, into our 3D world. And it's going to give us basically location on the Z-axis as well as the X and Y. And it's going to help us reconstruct a scene. And that's, frankly, just, it's embarrassingly powerful, particularly for a free piece of software. Can we play Spot the Fanboy now? That would be me. Okay, right. So I'm going to select all of my trackers, just hit A to select them all. I need 8 trackers that go from beginning to end of my clip in order to make a camera solve. So how many have I got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So, okay, we'll track forwards. These are a fine, keyframed, no normalization. Let's go. Do you see how fast that is? Oh, blistering speeds. And all of them, bar this one, have worked. So you can see here in our graph editor, this wobble. I'm assuming that's where the tracker broke. And you can see that it is. And you can see what's happening under here. It's giving us very detailed information to work with. So what I could do is, well, firstly, let's tap A twice to deselect all. And I'm going to choose this little filtering option. This means this is filtering just selected or all. So with that on, it will only show the graph information for selected trackers. So I'm going to select that tracker, and you can see it comes to here and fails. But before it fails, it wobbles out, freaks out, and it's going to damage our clean solve. So I can either try and fix this, or I can just hit X to delete it, or I can delete from, I'm just going to do that again, hit this button, and it deletes forwards. And somehow I just hid my my keys. So if that happens to you, yeah, there's normally little arrows around the pane which allow you to pull these things out. So yeah, I don't know if I could do that if I tried to hide that again. Oh, Blender, you're fun. So yeah, so this one will delete anything forward at that point. This one will delete anything reverse at that point. So we'll delete that. But actually, I don't need that tracker. So we'll get rid of it. So we've got our points. We've got 9 points, is it? Great. But we won't stop there because I want more information about this scene. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the end frame here. And I'm going to use the annotation tool and draw. And I'm going to draw around our guys. Incidentally, this guy right here, this one, that's Ton Rosenthal, that is. If you don't know who that is, Ton Rosenthal created Blender. He's the father of Blender. He's one of the coolest guys on earth. He's about 7 foot tall, partially deaf, Dutch, and created Blender. I mean, that's a combination for a winning chap, isn't it? He's lovely. And he always treats me like the ugly girl at the ball. It's terrible. I don't know. There's a whole story behind that, but I won't bore you with it. So what we're going to do, we've drawn our annotation around stuff we don't want to track. And then we're going to click Detect Features, and it starts detecting features. We're going to roll this up and say Outside Annotated Area. And that means it will detect features, but only outside of our annotation. We can then take down the distance between the tracking points. We could take down the threshold for what it considers to be a good track point. And the margin is how close these track points are to the edge. So we've got a whole new host of tracker points there. And what we're going to do is we're going to track backwards with them. And they're not going to get to the end, but that's all right. Because we've already got over 8 trackers which go beginning to end incredibly tightly. So these are just going to flesh out our scene. Unfortunately, some of them break quite dramatically. So you can see here, I'm going to select this one, and as I select the graph curve, not very curvy though, is it? This tracker goes white, so that corresponds to that tracker. So I'm going to double A to deselect all, and then select the offending tracker, and we can look here. It goes up and down the. I nearly said shaft. I'm not going to. The arm of the boom pole, boom stand. It's a C stand with a boom, if you want to get technical. And yeah, so we're just gonna delete from there because this is all real tight. This is lovely. So we've got some tracking information from there. That's good. Then where's the next bumpy bits? There's some bumpy bits here. Yep. So again, I can't actually see. There it is. There's our offending fella. Going to delete that. And yeah, this is a bit manual, but you know, there are actually cleanup operations in here, which I would encourage you to experiment with, but I would encourage you to experiment with them, but sorry, I'm in Cardiff, so you know, a bit of local culture. Right. So deselect all, select that, delete from that point. I can assume that that one didn't get anywhere. That just did, but we'll keep it, you know, why not? Where's the next one, which goes skew-if? There's one there. So again, if you're not sure what I'm looking at, it's not just jaggy points, because we've got some bits here which are a little bit jaggy, but they're all, the trackers are doing that same thing. That's how you can kind of, and obviously it depends where they are in the frame, but you can see outlying elements of this. You know, you can see outliers and go, I think that might be a problematic track. At least I can, because I'm special. Yeah, I'm just culling this. I'm going to try and do this a little bit faster. In fact, I'm going to ignore a lot of the bad track stuff, because you don't have to be too precise with this. I mean, Blender's a very smart piece of software. It's a very bright lad, and it knows what to do. It knows its job. So anyway, we've got those tracking points. And what you could do if you really wanted to is you could go to the start of the frame, annotate, draw around these guys, detect some more points, and then track forward as well. And you get a greater density of these tracking points. And that's all going to help towards a solve, as long as they're good. Now, this is another important thing to remember when you're tracking. It is better to have a small number of incredibly accurate points than it is to have a massive number of sloppy bad tracks, because, you know, that the good data is going to get lost in the bad data. And, you know, you want this stuff to be accurate representation of your scene. Actually, do you know what? We are going to do one more track, simply because I know it will break, and that way I can show you how you fix, how you can fix a NAF tracking point. So we're going to create one here, and you'd think that's a pretty good point to track. Excuse me. But I'll hit forward, and it's going to break. It breaks about halfway through. And we can see, if I just go back to the last frame, it's skewing all over the place. And part of this is because you can see the light, the bloom from the light is intensifying. And so it's changing the pattern. So one thing we could do is tick normalize. That's good. The other thing we could do, and sometimes you don't need to change the setting at all. Normally with an aberrant tracking point, the best thing you can do is select it, just hit S and give it a little bit of a wiggle, and then track forward a frame. And you can see it managed to track that next frame, because you created a keyframe. By giving it a little wiggle, you've created a new keyframe. Of course, we could tell Blender just to do that itself every time, every frame. It can just use the previous frame. So by using previous frame and normalize, and then I'm just going to sort of reset. I'm going to so by using previous frame and normalize, we're going to allow this tracking point to continue its job. But I'm just going to reset the skewing of the affine track position. Now, bear in mind, what that's doing is creating a new keyframe. It's not changing the data, the location data. It isn't changing any of that. It's just changing how the tracker sees the pattern, and therefore how it will continue to track forward. It's not changing the location data. However, if I were to hit G and move this or grab this point or do this, then all of that will change the location data. That central point is what we're all about. However, actually, because I know there's no other point in the video where I can cover this, you can also do something called offset tracking. So if like something went in front of this point, you could hit GG and move it, and then track from another point. GG again. I could track from here. I could track from somewhere which isn't being occluded by the object. I'm not going to do that in this session, but it's a useful thing to know. The offset tracking point features are here. There we are. So that's useful to know. Before we continue doing that, also, it's useful to know this, that you can change the display stuff here. And one of the useful things to know is the search pattern area. So this first box is the pattern it's looking for, and this second box is the space in which it will look for it. It doesn't do the whole frame every time. It just goes to the bounds of that search box. I keep that turned off by default because I don't tend to need it. Anyway, that's a lot of waffle. That's a lot of waffle. Let's go. So with our new settings, we're just going to track forward. And it gets right the way to the end. So that went from a failed tracking point to a bloody lovely tracking point in a couple of clicks. The waffle wasn't necessary. You don't have to, monologue at it to make it work. That's just my preference. Right, so I'm going to use those same settings roughly. I'm going to give it a big search pattern because I think some of it, not a search pattern, sorry, a big pattern area to track because I think it might help. See if we can do it in one. Oh, he fails because you click this button, just tracks a single frame at a time. This one does the whole thing. And it did it all in one. So, that's that, as we saw in the previous one, that should have failed halfway through using the original settings. And as you can see, this one, just to reiterate that point, this thing is skewing all over the place, but it's just as stable as this point that isn't skewing all over the place. It's just the pattern shifting and changing because it wasn't normalized up until that point. So yeah, anyway, that was a lot of talking. So can we get some results now, please? Because, otherwise this is all very tedious. Just checking something. We have this aberrant point, which isn't actually doing anything, I don't think. I occasionally accidentally create tracking points in things. And yeah, that's no good to no one. So, good. What we're going to do now is we're going to solve the motion. So we're going to take all the information from these tracking points and we're going to create a camera from it. So we're going to click keyframe. So the tripod thing in this solve, so we're in the solve pane, and under that there's a tripod thing, which if you're using a nodal pan, so something which is on tripod and it just looks left and right and up and down, but it doesn't move around, then you can use that and that will help you track. And yeah, but we're not doing that. This camera move it's dollying in and it's booming up and down. We're going to select solve keyframe. What that's going to allow us to, if you don't do that, you've got to set manual keyframes. And what I mean by keyframes, it's not the keyframes of a tracker. It's Blender is going to find 2 points within that video where the camera has moved, and it's going to use those 2 keyframes to do a little bit of clever maths to extrapolate the Z-axis of all our tracking points, allowing us to reconstruct the 3D scene. So we'll be moving out of a 2-dimensional tracking XY sort of environment into XYZ, having that 3rd dimension. Yeah, I know Maya tracks in 4 dimensions, and actually technically this tracks in 4 dimensions because obviously time. That would, yeah, being stupid. Ignore what I said. And we're also going to allow it to refine focal length, optical center, and radial distortion because Blender Cloud, the people who posted this footage, didn't include metadata. And when you're tracking this sort of footage, you should know the sensor size of the camera. You should know what the camera is. You should know the focal length of the lens. And we don't know any of that. What I'm going to guess, looking at the footage and the age of the footage, that it's a 35mm sensor with a 35mm lens. That's my guess. And we're going to let Blender take a guess and figure it out. Even if you do know, sometimes this can help because, it's a mathematical model. It's It's figuring stuff out. And frankly, sometimes manufacturers post specs and they're not accurate. Or sometimes you find specs on the internet and they're not accurate either. But if you do know them, plug those the details in over here on your track, camera, center width, aspect ratio. yeah, although I wouldn't recommend tracking anamorphic footage. I've just had to do that for a short film, and it is, well, I'd like those days and weeks of my life back, frankly. Anyway, shall I stop talking and just click the button? Let's click the button. Solving camera, refining solution. Some data failed to construct. That's never happened to me before. I say that to all the girls. What the actual merry funk? See console for details. Oh dear God. No camera for frame 0. Wouldn't you just know it? Give me a moment.
Is this the curse of tracking that we mentioned earlier?
Oh, fuck yeah. I mean, sorry. I've done this because it turned out the audio wasn't recording yesterday when I was doing this. So I've done this video, and my partner called me halfway through a video. So I've done this 4 times and never had this error. So that's fun. Let's turn off those and see if it'll solve. No. All right. Right. There we go. Try that. Why, I oughta. I might have to Google that at some point to figure out why that's working. Why is it a fatal error? Is it going to stop us continuing? Set as background, set up tracking scene. It doesn't look like it's going to stop it. I think what it is it's saying, oh, on this frame we don't have any tracking data, and it's like, well, I probably didn't want it on that frame. So as we can, right? So. I'm going to undo that so that you can see what I just did again. I just needed to check that we could go forward. It doesn't look like it's a fatal error. It's going to stop us. I say this now, and later on the whole computer will explode. But we've solved our camera motion, albeit with that error that I don't understand. But you can also see up here where it says solve error 0.23 pixels. Anything under 1 pixel is really good, okay? That's 0.23 pixels. That's slam-a-lamming, despite the error it was just throwing up that I don't understand because I an IQ in single figures. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to scene setup and set as background. And what that does, if I go into my camera, is it's basically put the footage in our camera's background images. So there's an option in background images where you can load video footage or still footage for referencing and whatever. Great little feature. Anyway, it loads that up into there. And then we can also click setup, and I'm going to come out of the camera so you can see it happen. Setup tracking scene. And now suddenly we've got a floor plane, a cube, and a bunch of empties. And these empties are parented to the camera. So what we need to do now is, well, you don't need to do it, but it's going to be, if you don't do this, it will make your life very difficult later on. We need to sort of align, because the default position of the camera is like this kind of like angle looking down on a scene in Blender. And that's not very good for VFX because typically cameras are set up parallel to the ground and facing forwards. So I'm going to use my 3D cursor as the pivot point. The 3D cursor is this thing here, and we can go Shift S and snap it to world origin. Of course, mine already is because I'm a pro. And then I'm going to hit R, and it's going to rotate the camera around that pivot point. Then I'm going to go to my side view. I did that with Alt and is it right click and just swiped, but you can do it with the number pad as well. Anyway, again with my point there, I'm going to rotate, and you can see that these trackers along the bottom here represent the floor. In fact, if I select these trackers here, these two, you can see they're highlighting in the tracking pane. So we can see what tracker relates to what empty. And we know that's along the floor because we set them on the floor. We know this one's also on the floor. Everybody don't a dinosaur. Sorry, I kept saying floor and it triggered some memory. And yeah, so we can select all these floor tracking points to get a better idea of where our floor plane is. And it's all of that. So I'm just going to, again, I'm going to keep rotating this to get a sort of an approximate of where it would be. oops, I need my tools. I'm going to drag it along so it's more in the center of the world, because why not? The floor plane's good. And we've got this box here. So, you know, I don't need this box for anything in particular, but we might as well, I'm just going to turn this on to wireframe rendering. We might as well set this up in the scene. So we know that it's, you know, I'm going to try and make it match this cloth, this drop cloth here that's hiding the light stand. So we know that it starts around the same point as those two markers. And from there, we can go into edit mode and scale them. Oh, yeah, we'll scale on the x-axis. Why not? Scale on the y-axis. And then we can move it along. And I'm noticing actually that my camera is a bit tilted. So again, I can select this, snap my cursor to the world origin, bring up my rotate tool, and I can just whoop, try and level that out. That looks pretty good to me. And yeah, and then we're gonna, by the way, Sam, were you still following? Is it, or is it, you know, has everyone gone to sleep yet?
Yeah, all good.
Good. So there we go. So we've approximately got this position here. Now, it's an irregular shape, so I mean, I'm not too worried about any precision on that. Also, I'm not doing anything with this. You know, this is purely just me going, oh, look at that. Again, with the floor plane, I think the wall starts around here somewhere. In a green screen, it's very hard to tell because I think they've even got it slightly coved. It's very hard to tell where the walls start and end, but I'm going to select those points, hit double G to edge slide. And yeah, around about there. And again, this is not the wall. This is some cloth laying along the floor. In the original couple of times I was doing it, I was trying to line this up with a wall and with this, thinking it was the wall because I wasn't looking at the footage right, and I was getting very confused. Anyway, if we just scrub through our timeline, you can now see that, firstly, I've made an egregious error because somehow I think I've keyframed that. Have I keyframed that or something? Or did I just push it to the wrong point? Yeah. Got to get that back in line with our two empties here. And yeah, I don't know what I did there. I must have absolutely naffed that up. Try again. I said that it didn't matter when I started, and now I'm like, it matters. It matters. It's got to be right so I can't look bad on Zoom. Yeah, there we go. So now you can see that the floor follows the floor, and the cube follows that cloth drop, and that's great because I mean we've started to get. In fact, if you look at it, you've got the floor, you've got we've got the position of the lights, which we'll add in a moment. We've got these things here, which are the boom stands. You know, they're the stands that we were looking at. So you can see that in 3D space, those markers now correlate to the position of the stand. So we're actually beginning to get a lot of really detailed information, considering we didn't even have the camera sensor or focal length of the camera. Now we've got a lot of really detailed information about this scene, and we can start creating 3D assets within that scene to do fun stuff. So yeah, with that in mind, we know that these two are the lights. So I'm going to snap the cursor to selected, and I'm going to create Shift A spotlight, and I'm going to point that spotlight at the camera. Yeah, about there. And yeah, that seems to work for me. just sort of lining that up as best I can. But, you know, seeing as we're taking information from a scene, why don't we go to our light's information, its data, and we can use this selector, and we can select the color of that light. So we're getting an approximate color temperature. And to me, that looks like an ARRI Junior, which is about a 1K light. So there's a 2K version as well and all that. But let's assume it's 1K. Not wonky, 1K. So yeah, 1,000 watts. Now, bear in mind, this is all simulations. CG is cheating. It's not a scientific sort of exactitude. That's not a word. You're fudging stuff. This is a starting point. And when you sort of like, you're putting your scene together, you go, yeah, that's not working for me. Let's just, you know, let's take it down. Let's, whatever. It doesn't matter. These are just starting points to get us sort of close and then fudge it from there. CG is cheating. One of the things which I found when I first started tracking was I kind of imagined that everything would be so precise because computers were doing it, that I could, you know, have a really precise model and a really precise track, and I would just put it together and it would fit like a jigsaw. And that has literally never happened to anyone on God's green earth. I don't believe in God. Anyway, why am I saying these things? I do apologize. I'm a moron. Anyway, let's actually, I don't like that. There we go. So that light will light things as lights tend to do. Actually, if we track forwards, you can see that there are, if we go forwards in the scene, you can see that there is actually a big sun bounce reflector over here and another poly reflector and some flags, a couple of par cans, all of this detailed information in our scene could help us reconstruct it. But I ain't going to do that because we've got things to do. So moving forwards, so is everyone sort of clear on what I've done there before I move to the next bit? Sam's left, hasn't he? He's just.
Well, I'm happy to carry on. No one's saying don't carry on.
Please, for God's sake, stop. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to track this object. We're going to track the box of hugs, or of Gwyneth Paltrow's head, depending which timeline of my nonsense you are following. So we're going to go over to here to our track panel, and with that camera represents the track we just did. And we're going to press plus. And we're going to create an object track by default. And we're going to call it box because we're tracking a box. And what we're going to do is exactly the same as previously. A fine keyframe pre-pass works for me. I'm going to start adding in these wee fellas, these tracking points. And again, it's just control clicking. And something interesting about this is if I were to try and track this red ball, you'd think that's a really good point to track. In fact, they clearly did because they stuck them all over everything. But if I track that forward, it'll break. Why does it break? It's a big red ball. It's pretty obvious as a tracking point. Well, the reason is the pattern is looking for red and then green. You know, it's looking for other things as well, but it's red and then green. And then as we go forwards, you'll see that Ton Rosenthal's finger ruins everything. Damn you, Ton! And yeah, because his finger comes into shot. So we're now getting beige. Yes, white people are all beige. The most accurate thing I've said all day. Red, and then this skin tone, and then green. I'm so sorry if I'm offending anyone. I'm genuinely not trying to. I'm just have verbal diarrhea. So we've got red, then we've got skin, then we've got green, and that breaks the pattern and therefore it doesn't work. So what we can do instead of that, I'm just going to delete all that tracking information. We've still got our tracker. I'm just going to go down to here and I'm going to scale it down so it doesn't see any of that. Also be aware we've got these shadows being cast by the light, and as it moves around, those shadows are going to move and that pattern's going to change and it's going to mess us up. Also, the ball is, you know, I mean, maybe it's an inch or two up in the air from this surface, and to be honest, I'm not interested in the balls. First time I've said that, sweetheart. Oh God, why? I'm so sorry. I'm interested in this surface. I'm not interested in balls. I'm interested in the box. I mean, I'm assuming everyone on this Zoom feed's 18, and therefore it's not a crime what I'm saying. Sam, reassure me. I I fear I'm going to prison. Sam is not reassuring
Sorry,
me.
I was laughing, so I couldn't take myself on mute.
See, that's the thing, is because it's all muted, I don't know if it's silent disgust or if it's actually people are enjoying themselves and at my expense and my own horror. Anyway, so yeah, we've got some tracking points. Oh, yeah, son. I'm going to do this one too. I apologize, but again, the voices are merely manifestations of the voices in my head. No, they're merely, it's a habit of doing voices. They're not meant to be anything. So anyway, we've got a bunch of tracking points. We don't need a bare minimum of tracking points. Really, we only need 2 to track an object, I think. I might be wrong on that. But we've got a myriad of them on here, which is lovely. So I've tracked all these points, and I'm just going to, sorry, I've made all these points. I'm going to track forward. We lost one there because old beardy man here, his chin got him away. Look at that. Ooh. Oh, come on. At least it gracefully leaves the tracking thing. So what we're going to do now is, I want this point. It is mine. I shall have it. So I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm going to adjust it so that his chin doesn't catch it, and then track forward. And that gets all the way to the end. Do you see how fast that is? It is unbelievable. I used to spend literally weeks tracking a single thing, mostly because I was so bad at it. I would have to manually fudge every point for every other frame. That's something else which you should bear in mind. If you're filming your own footage to track, and by the way, I will make sure you get a link for this footage if you want to practice on this footage. But it is available on the Blender Cloud if you are a subscriber. Yeah. Noise, grain, motion blur, these are all the death of tracking. You know, motion blur is something that you want in your footage, but you don't want too much of it. In fact, if something is really fast, then you're really going to struggle, because that pattern is being blurred constantly and therefore harder to recognize. And then grain and noise obviously obscures the tracking point as well. It obscures the pattern and therefore makes it harder to recognize. Something else is my camera is an A7S Mark II, and I love it, but hasn't got a global shutter, so you get that rolling shutter thing. That also absolute death to tracking points. It doesn't mean you can't shoot on cameras like that or iPhones or whatever. You can, but be careful. Use as much light as possible, as low a gain, as low an ISO as possible, and you'll get better results. I did my initial tests for this talk with an iPhone footage and with directly streamed footage, which meant it was heavily compressed. And yeah, you can do it, but it's a lot of babysitting each of these tracking points. Anyway, we've got tracking points. Whee! We've got tracking points. So what we're going to do now is we're going to solve these tracking points. Exactly the same as before. We've got a few less options. Is it going to blow up? Average reprojection error, 0.30. That's lama-lamming. Still, that's actually the worst I've had on my tests of this. That's the worst, but that's still amazing. That's really good. So what we're going to do is we're going to come out of our camera so you can see how this goes. We've got all these lovely points which it's solved for us, and under the geometry tab, we can click, which one is it? 3D markers to mesh. That was hard to say, 3D markers to mesh. And what frame am I on? I'm on frame 1, that's good. You can see that it's created vertices at the center of every tracking point. Why is that important? Why does that matter? Well, right now it doesn't, because those vertices don't follow those tracking points. However, if I, with the mesh object selected, I go to the constraints tab and I give it an object solver constraint. I choose our object track box. They disappear as they fly off into the ether. I choose the camera, which is called camera. And then I hit set inverse, and suddenly they're back. They're back, baby. And then we can scrub through, and you can see those points are now moving in space along with the track. So, I mean, and this, bear in mind, this is a rigid object that we're tracking, and we're going to extrapolate the geometry of that object from this. But if you do this on a face, you just draw some tracking points on your face, and you track those points, you actually get a reasonable facsimile of a 3D face, and it will deform. Yeah, so you could use that mesh as a control mesh for a more detailed face. You could sculpt a face, then use a mesh deform modifier or something like that. So one of what I was originally going to do for this test was sculpt like mutilated eye socket with like a fork in it or something, and scars and blood, and then just track that onto my face and then show you how it deforms. I don't got time for that, and unfortunately, I don't have time for that. But it's the same principles, and that is good. So anyway, we can be done with that for now. And again, we're in our scene now. These empties are getting they're a bit big. We can go down to our track. We can go to our view options and change the tracker size a little bit, just so they're not as obtrusive. You can do that individually as well by selecting them. And look, no, I'm not going to go into that. Ain't got time for that. Oh, that's my alarm saying I've got to go pick up my child, but I don't. My partner's doing it today. But that does also mean I've run out of time technically, which is terrible. It means I've talked too much. Sam, what's going on?
What's going on?
Yeah. As in, I've hit 3 o'clock, which was supposed to be the cutoff for this. Shall I carry on going? Because I've got lots more to say.
If that's all right. Yeah,
I was supposed to be able to do this in 45 minutes. That's shocking. Yeah, okay, I'll carry on and I'll make it fast. So, okay, so we've got these points in 3D space. If I select 2 points and hit F, that will fill an edge between them. If I then hit E and drag it up, suddenly I've extruded a face. Okay, now we can drag those points out to match other points in the thing. And then if I just use full stop on the numpad so I could zoom in to focus on what was there. And then obviously because I was just doing that in X and Y, I now have to make sure, just massage them slightly on the Z axis, the distance. I'm just going to make sure that they're, because we've got these tracking points, we know from the maths that Blender has done on our behalf, that these tracking points are somewhat accurate in the 3D space. So we know that these are going to be approximately in line with these tracking points. So we're just going to, fudge it that way. And then we're going to, again, we're just massaging the points a little bit to make sure that they sort of fit something. And then if we go back and forth, hey presto, we've basically got a plane track there. Yeah. So we could now put like some writing on this, and then, 2x4 timber from Taiwan, who knows, whatever you wanted to say on that bit of wood, or replace it with, or you could replace it with, we could extrude it out again, give it a metal shader, and suddenly that's an iron rod or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So what we're doing is basically reconstructing geometry in 3D space. Now, you don't have to reconstruct geometry. You can replace it in its entirety, which is also nice. Anyway, let's reconstruct this box. So I'm going to choose 3 points on here because I've only got 3 points. It would be ideal if we had 4, but we don't. So I'm going to select this edge. I'm going to hit space and type in subdivide. That gives us an extra point to play with. And I'm going to extrapolate it out. And basically, I'm just trying to find the corners of this thing. Not going to be too precise. You can be more precise if you want to be. And yeah, there we go. Let's just line them up in 3D space. Again, this is a plane. We know it's fairly flat. So, so we're making sure it's not all distorted and weird. Now, you could involve these other points if you really wanted to, but what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hit E. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to, I'm going to select that. I'm going to make sure I'm on plane. So I've got faces, sorry, rather than vertices selected. And I'm going to change this to normal. And then I can extrude it out along its own normals. And I know from this tracking marker here, that's about as far as I need to extrude it out. and it's slightly off. So I'm going to snap my cursor to here, select all, and then I'm going to rotate it. Oh, do you know what? I didn't want to select all. I just wanted to select this. So I'm going to use L to island select it so we don't get all of that in there. Whee. And if I've done my job properly without rushing too much, let's scrub it back and forth. No, it's slightly off still. Is it all off though? Because if it's all off, then yeah, I think it's just these bits. Do you know what it is? Yeah, let's have a look over here. So I've basically, as I said, these tracking points, they give us information that we should use. So let us match it. Is it that one? Yeah. So it should be slightly further past this. Much better. It's still not perfect because I've rushed. There we go. Actually, not bad. So now we have reconstructed the box of hugs, and obviously now, I mean, you could sculpt that into something, or you could replace it entirely. Now you know where its physical dimensions in space. You can recreate what you want from that. So we've got a light. You know, we've got a floor, we've got some scenery. So what do we do now? Well, we'd comp it together. With this, I feel like, as I said, I've done a pre-record of this, so it's already on my website, blenderclinic.com. I forgot my own website. So you can go on there if you wanted to check out this in a slightly less rushed fashion. But what we can do is just add in a keying node. And if you've got Node Wrangler enabled, so add-ons, Node Wrangler, make sure that box is ticked and you're good. You can Control, Shift, and click any of these things in the compositor. As I said earlier, these nodes are already set up because we chose this preset here. Yeah, and what we can do is we can just choose a keying color. I'm going to choose a keying color over here. And then we've got our assets over there. Also, something else it's done is it's created this foreground and background thing, and I don't like that. I don't want to work in that manner. So will you stop it? There we go. I'm going to delete the foreground the foreground collection. And there we go. We've got background. And what we need to do now is hit F12 to render. And that's going to render the CG footage. And that's good. And then what we need to do is swap those around, I think. Oh, yeah. And we need to make sure that this node is connected. Control Shift click. And you can see we are getting there. So yes. Okay. What I can't tell, oh yeah, no, I can't tell if the background is, because it's all grays, you might want to go into the 3D viewport, change the color of some things. Oh yeah, with this background, the way the compositor works, you have to zoom out in here. It's quite fiddly, it's very annoying. Yeah, I'm going to select this edge. I do hate it when I get that flustered sort of rushing thing going on, because I start making mistakes and looking rather silly. It makes it harder to think straight. So I'm going to just give this a material so that we can see what it is. And then I'll hit F12 and see how that takes effect. Yeah, great. So we are seeing the background. We are seeing that this is keyed out, but obviously because we've got a lot of garbage in here, we've got a lot of stuff which wasn't, you know, the marker points and so on, it's difficult to tell. that the background is, it's all dropped out and this is all working lovely. We don't need this alpha over node here, so we'll just disconnect that. So there, excellent. So that's working. There's one more thing to show you as quickly as I humanly can. I'm probably not going to be able to do it justice. We can either go back into motion tracking and change this to mask, or we can just go to the masking tab where it's already got our dope sheet for masking keyframes as well. All we're going to do is select, oh no, it was that one, wasn't it? We're going to select our footage, and we're going to draw a mask. Basically, we're going to create a garbage mask so that we can get rid of all of this nonsense in here. You know, Tom Rosenthal is ruining our shot, even though he made the software we're making it in and therefore made it possible. I choose to be ungrateful. So I'm just going to control click, control click, control click, control click. And what I was going to do was actually go in 45 minutes, do all of what I've done, and then also I animate the mask, but I'm not going to have time to do that now. Well, not properly. I'm going to hit keyframe, auto keyframe, and now it hasn't created a keyframe for me because I didn't have auto keying on when I created it. So I'm just going to select all with A, hit G, give it a wiggle, and it's created a keyframe. Now what I'm going to do is scrub backwards. I'm going to use G. Basically, we're creating an animated mask here, and you know, he's going to lose some fingers. We're not going to quite catch all of these markers because we're running out of time, or have run out of time. A to select all. I'm going to tap there to set my 2D cursor, change this to 2D cursor, and then I can scale from that as a pivot point. So it's just like the 3D cursor in the 3D viewport. Super useful to have. We're going to keep scrubbing all the way to the end. Select all, G, 3D cursor, scale. Then I can use B for bounding box to select, and then G to move, and then again, so now we're selecting them on mass, which is useful. And yeah, this is not going to look great, but it will show you the vague premise of how this works. So if I scrub through, you can see we lose some fingers here, but you know, he gets to caress. No, I'm not going to say that. He gets to give his box a hug, and that's fine. So what do we do with that? We go up to here. We add a new node with Shift A, search, type in mask. Choose the mask we made, which is also called mask because, you know, we're nothing if not original. And we'll plug that into the garbage mask. And it crashed. That's fine. That's fine. I don't mind. I don't mind. I don't mind. Fortunately, if that ever happens to you, you can go to recover. Last session might work, but autosave is my favorite. We'll go to autosave. And date modified. And I know these two are still currently open, so that's why they're there. Recover autosave, and it was 1 minute ago, that last save. So we're back where we were. I don't know why that crash happened, but basically I've got to recreate that mask. That was very weird. I genuinely haven't had any crashes with this, except for when I was using an experimental version of Blender by mistake. So yeah, I haven't had any crashes doing this, so that is peculiar. It is the curse. The curse. The curse. I'm assuming everyone's gone home and I'm just blending in the dark. It's a Springsteen song, in case you were wondering. No, it's not.
No, we're still here.
Right. Well, again, this is a very scrappy mask, a scrappy do. But it's. I think it's good enough to sort of show what I'm, what I'm banging on about here. Oh, do as you're told. 2D cursor. Right. Let's all pretend that I did a really good job of that mask, and let's also is a vital thing to learn in Blender. Track. Test. Oh, no, that's already used. There we go. We'll have a wonky name. So there's a vital lesson to learn in Blender. Always save, even if you're doing a live thingamabob. So what we're going to do is we'll add in a mask. Mask. Garbage mask. And it crashed again. All right. Well, we just saved it before that. So I'll, do you know what? Do you know what it is? I think I'm using the wrong version of Blender again. Blender. Alternately, I do have other save files I can use and go to, but I don't want to sort of leave it in a thing where it's like, oh, you can do all that work and then Blender just dies. That seems like a bad advertisement for what is incredibly stable software, except for right this second. Open. Track test. That was it. So let's go to compositing, and maybe if we're in this view, it will be less desirous of crashing. Okay, that didn't crash, but then will it? Won't it? How's it going to go? Well, that's interesting, but it also hasn't done the thing. It hasn't. Oh, did it delete my mask again? Did I not have what the merry? Yeah, the merry month of May. Right. So that is there, and there is a mask. So why is it not working? Oh, Control Shift. There we go. So it is. It's. You can see there. It has done something. It's deleted our guy. Oh no! Fortunately, that is a deliberate mistake. So I'm just going to create an invert node, slap it on there, and now we have a garbage masked man in our keying setup, and then we can link the alpha over, hit F12 to render, rednar, and you can see we have a chap in a, I'll pull this window down here, you can see there he is hugging his box, garbage masked green screen, stood on the thing with a virtual 3D light. And whilst this isn't, in fact, I have a render. Here's one I made earlier because Blue Peter was a big influence on me. Bear with me. Which one is it? Let's just say it's that one. So, yeah. This is another one where I left an arbitrary triangle there for fun. Oh, no, that's not the one. I was going to show you how to key stuff into the foreground using Cryptomat. I know where it's hidden. Bear with me 1 second. Special track mask comp, rednar. Lovely. There we go. So there we go. A slightly better version of it. But yeah, obviously I haven't had time to show you tracking using Cryptomask to put that in the foreground. But if you wanted to check it out on my website, you can, and that will give you a slightly more coherent version, crash-free, and probably less swearing. Who knows? What I will say is, I'm aware what we're looking at is it's not a finished product, but it was never meant to be. The job of the tracking, asking the well, less so the compositing artist, but the job of the person who's tracking, you're preparing a file for other people to, or for yourself to put that work into and to transform that scene. So we're talking about getting footage into a scene and then creating that scene around it and giving people the tools to do that job well. And this is an incredibly powerful start that normally I can do in under an hour. It took a little longer today because, hey, waffle. But I don't know how you guys feel about it, but that for me is so powerful. I know exactly what I can do with it. I could track something to his hand. I could, give him a cybernetic arm. You could, using this footage, you could test that and try tracking without the tracking markers and see how you get on. Yeah, you can do so much with so little. And for me, that's an incredibly powerful thing. I don't know what's pinging, but it's really annoying. Sorry, I think it's my Google Chats. It's a client asking me to go and check something for him. Anyway, that's so that's all we've got time for, except for questions. And how do you feel about that, Sam? How was that for you? I appreciate it was a little anticlimactic at the end when everything started going blah. But yeah.
No, it's great. I learned it and I laughed at the same time.
Excellent.
Probably in places where I shouldn't have done. But yeah, it's great. Amazing. And you can do all that for free on your regular computer.
I'd go as far as saying it's actually, I mean, I've used Buju, I've used Synthesize, I've used Marker, I've used After Effects, and this is my favorite software to track in now. I did really love After Effects for a time, but it's so powerful being able to reconstruct 3D elements. And as I said, with that constraint, the object track constraint, if you were to track like an organic thing, as it stretches, those points will move with it. And that in itself is like, oh my God, wow. Do you know what I mean? Because it provides a mesh that you can use to deform other meshes, and visual effects makeup is, it's just a step away from that. There was stuff in the chat there. What's in the chat? Would you use Blender for modeling, tracking, rendering, and compositing? Would you need to step outside of the software at all? I don't. Other people do. I'm working with Blue Zoo at the moment, who are a wonderful company. If you get a chance to work with them, I definitely recommend it. They are experimenting with using Blender for stuff, and I know that the modeling artists currently, because they're used to Maya, are using Maya. They're sending it to me, I'm rigging it in Blender, and then the animators are animating in Blender. But yeah, you can basically do everything in Blender and never leave it. I don't always do that, mind. There's stuff like Substance Painter and Quicksaw Mixer that I really enjoy using. And there's brilliant texture painting tools in Blender, but I do use occasionally. I use other software, and you will need like stuff like image editing software like GIMP is perfect. And Critter and so on to paint up textures. You can do it in Blender. You can use Blender much like Photoshop. But yeah, there's preferences, isn't it? But you can absolutely do 99%, if not 100% of your pipeline in Blender if you want to do that. The Blender Foundation, the Blender Animation Studio, the people who are responsible for this footage and all the animated yearly movies that Blender makes, they do everything in Blender or open source software. They never use non-open source software. And they very rarely step outside of Blender, if I'm honest. But the only thing it can't do really is sound. And you can import sound into it, but you can't. There's not a lot of options to edit sound. So doing an audio mix is something else. But it's got a video editor. It's got bells. It's got whistles. Death is upon us. Prison for you. Video is flipped.
I have a question. If Blender can do all of this stuff, why is it free?
So the chap in the video who we deleted, Ton Rosenthal, the creator of Blender, there's actually a really good video on this on YouTube. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. Basically, it was animation software called Neo Geo, nothing to do with the games console, back in the early 90s, and it was one of these things investors were pouring money into it, but it kind of died a death and it wasn't able to compete. And Ton managed to negotiate that, or basically, I think it was an instance of crowdfunding where he basically said, like, okay, I'm going to buy the rights for this software and then release it for free. And people chipped in and he got that going. And because people are so passionate about the software, we're donating to the Blender Institute, the Blender Foundation, and various companies now, including Ubisoft, I think Nike, various big companies, Google, all are putting money into it because everyone uses it a little bit. Even if they don't admit it, most studios have Blender on a couple of machines to do that thing. It's like, oh God, we need to track. Do we need to buy a license for Synthesize? No, I'll do it in Blender. Or we need to do a cloth simulation. Oh, do we need a Houdini license? Well, it would help, but we could just do it in Blender. Do you know what I mean? It's that toolkit. It's like the Swiss Army knife of creativity. It's always there and it's always useful. It's free because he made a promise for it to be open source. And once it's gone open source, it can't go back, basically. You can get branching offshoots of Blender that become proprietary, but the core of Blender is always public domain. It cannot be bought. It's impossible to buy it. It is always on a public license, and therefore it will remain free forever. But because so many people are passionate about it, so many people donate money, they've got a really good business model, you know, and zero pressure. The money comes in, they hire people, and it keeps going. A few years ago, they struggled to have, you know, as many developers as they'd like, but now, you know, they want for nothing. That's not true, but I mean, they you know, they're doing very well, so that they can hire as many people as they've hired as many people as they've needed, but they're not the sort of company which just throws money at stuff, because obviously it's our money and they're very careful with it. And anyway, I've extrapolated on the question greatly.
No, thanks. That was interesting.
It didn't even make sense, Sam, but you're being very kind. Yeah. Is there anything else I can?
I think everyone is probably all right.
Or asleep.
Who knows? One of the two.
There we go. So yeah, I think it's a powerful solution anyway, and tracking in it. I'm glad I came back to it over the last couple of weeks. Oh, do you know what? There is something I wanted to. Oh no. Do you know what? Right, there's something really cool that I discovered today, and I've done a little video for it. It's on my website if you want to check it out. But there's something called Virtua Camera. It's a $4.99 iPhone app, and basically it allows it comes with an add-on for Blender, and you scan a QR code, provided you're both on the same, your computer and your phone's on the same network. It allows you to control your camera by doing that and add in, you know, handheld camera motion. But it's on, there's a literally just before we started, I posted a video on my site about it, blenderclinic.com. And yeah, and it's great. It's really just, it's lovely. I've done the same thing before with Vive trackers, but it took hours to set up. Whereas this was just like click, 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 scan, whoop, whoop, whoop. Oh, nice.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where if you were to solve something down to like a tripod, you know, you remove the motion in a shot for a visual effect thing, and then you wanted to put motion back in, then that's a really good way to go about it. So it's you know, it pairs quite nicely with being able to track objects. So you could shoot everything on a tripod, track the objects in the scene to make it easier for yourself, and then add in handheld motion with that. Also, if you are interested in that sort of thing, Ian Hubert is a chap you should Google on YouTube and on Twitter. He does 1 minute Blender tutorials, amongst other things. But he does a technique that I also I started doing this technique, and I was like, I should do a tutorial on this. And then he came out and did a tutorial at the same time, where you can actually put an image plane with your footage in the scene. And if you've keyed it already, so it's got an alpha channel, it casts shadows in the scene in Blender. So like this guy who's there, instead of having this done in the compositor, we could, oh no, I've got too many instances of Blender open. I wonder why it crashed. So what we could do is go into our 3D view, and if you've got the add-on images planes, let's just check that I have it. Image, import images planes. What I could do is, I just need to find my footage. Typically right. Import images plane, footage, linear HD, la la la. Import images plane, animate image sequences, and hopefully, yeah. So you could import that in, but what you'd want to do is do this with keyed footage which has already been keyed. So you could run it through the keyer. Bear with me a second. I'm not quite sure why that light isn't casting any light. I must have turned something off in here. But it doesn't matter anyway. So the principle is that you can put an image plane in there, and that image plane has your video footage on it. As you can see, it plays in the thing. And if you've already keyed it, and then you lock it off you parent it to your camera, or you place it at a distance. And anyway, look up Ian Hubert. He'll explain it better than I can, because obviously that's a massive divergence. But you can actually have your footage in the 3D scene next to the things that it should be, casting shadows on the things that you want it to. And it's just, yeah, it's a great way to work. I've done it for a couple of shots on the film that I've been working on. Yeah, you can see that light is actually casting, but there. So yeah, that's another way about doing it, rather than compositing it in, is actually physically putting your footage into the scene. And that's something worth exploring. As I said, Ian Hubert on YouTube does some excellent tutorials on it. So that's enough waffle from me.
Marvelous. Good stuff. All right. Well, let's leave it there then, I reckon. Thank you very much. That was awesome. Thank
you very much for having me. It's been really good fun. I apologize about the bumpy ride.
That's why we're all here. And everyone's saying thanks.
Cool. Thank you guys. And yeah, if anyone does want to have, like, if you've got any questions, not whether it's about this or about anything in Blender, go on Twitter, hit me up at Blender Clinic. And if you wanted to come on and do a Zoom call, much like we're doing now, we can do that as a live session. Or you can just message me a question and I will try and answer it in a video reply.
Awesome.
All right. All right.
All right. Thank you very, very much. Okay. And yeah, I'll see you soon.
Okay, well, I'll end the session here then. Thank you very much, guys. Take care of yourself and hopefully speak soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye.